Watercolor Flowers. Today we're going to look at 10 different petal types. Welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met before, my name is Michelle. On this channel you'll find all things watercolor, including some mixed media, drawing and a little bit of color mixing, even some business tuition for artists. So please do consider subscribing. I make one free video a week here on YouTube on a Thursday with extra content on Saturdays for my Patreon subscribers. Now there are lots of videos on YouTube that will show you how to paint a flower with just a single brush stroke. I'm afraid I'm not that kind of painter. I do like a little bit more detail in my flowers. So I'm not strictly what you would call a botanical painter, someone that will spend, 5 hours on one petal. But I do like to paint my flowers, certainly the ones up close, by individual petals and to make them just look a little bit more structured. So whilst I'm talking, I'll put some pictures up of flower paintings that I have done before so you can see what sort of style flowers I paint. So I like fairly simple but detailed flowers, and I like them to be bright and colourful and full of punch and full of colour. And wherever possible I avoid drawing lines within my petals because they just don't look realistic. So what I'm going to do in this video is going to go through, rather than painting whole flowers, which is very time consuming, and certainly I'll do other videos where we concentrate on one flower, one type of flower, but in this video I'm going to concentrate on single petals so you can see how I approach each of these different petal shapes and these different colour combinations and the different types of detail that you get on petals. Now of course if I'm painting a poppy I might be doing a red poppy petal, but of course poppies come in all sorts of colours. I've got some lovely lilac ones. There are so many different species, aren't there? So many different colours, so many different shapes in the petal. But I think by going through these 10 basic petal shapes and petal details, I think you'll get a really good idea how to approach some of those more unusual types of petal when you get to them. So let's start with one of my favourites, rose petals, and this particular petal has 2 different colours in it. So let's talk briefly about the materials I'm using today, because I know you're all going to ask me in the comments otherwise. So the paper I'm painting on is SAA rough surface practice paper. Now you'll notice it's not rough at all. I don't know why they call it rough surface, but that's just what it is. If you're watching one of my videos and I'm painting what I would call a proper painting, a piece of paper that's been stretched onto board, then I'm usually using Saunders Waterford High White paper. I am just used to teaching in various venues and demonstrating. I've sometimes been asked to demonstrate in art shops and in studios, and they'll ask me to demonstrate with certain brands of materials. So I'm just not someone that is used to having to stick to one brand. I'm never going to tell you that you can't paint properly unless you've remortgaged your house and bought Archie's watercolour paper and Daniel Smith paints. Of course those are good paper and good paints, but it's nonsense. You do have to have a certain basic quality, so don't be using real rubbish stuff. But I'm here to prove that you can paint perfectly well on practice paper. It'll wrinkle a little bit today, this paper, because I haven't stretched it. So, but I have actually worked, when I've been asked to demonstrate this paper, I've worked on stretched paper and it's perfectly fine, as are most of the other brands of practice paper. I'm using today, these are also SAA brushes. This video is not sponsored by them, I just happen to like them. So these are a size 10 and a size 6. I do use various brands of brushes as well. I also like Daleroni and Daylon. I've also been working with Jackman's Art Materials recently, and I've been using their synthetic sable as well. So I always use a synthetic brush, and usually a size 6 and a size 10 does everything I need. I rarely go to other brushes except when I need to use special effects, but I'll just be using these 2 today. I'm going to use some cadmium yellow light for this one by Talon's Rembrandt. So what I'm doing here is I want that kind of just pale blush of colour. I rarely go as green and as acid as a lemon yellow with flowers. The only real exceptions to that would be some parts of daffodils are lemon and sometimes primroses, but generally speaking I'm going to want something a little bit warmer. Now I'm fading it out to water here, and it will be easier for you to do this than me because I'm actually having to tip my board so that the so my phone camera picks it up properly. But if you're working completely flat, which you should be for these, it won't be running anywhere. So I've got yellow on there and I faded it out pretty much to clean white. There are no puddles because I want to be able to control the paint. Now I'm going in for my my rose, and I want this to bleed a bit, so I've got quite wet paint, and I'm just going to put it a tiny bit around the edges. Now because it's wetter than the paint that's already on there, it will bleed in slightly. Any time that I want it to stop doing that, I can just control it by lifting a bit of the water out. I'm quite happy with that. I need a bit of a neater edge to it, so I'm going to change brushes, and this time I'm going in with fairly dry paint because I just want to clean up around the edge there, like so. I've got a bit of a hard edge forming here because the paint had dried, so we'll just rinse my brush so it's damp, and I'll just get a little bit of water along that edge so that we don't have any hard edges. You never want hard edges within a petal. Even when they've got markings, they are very rarely completely hard. So I'm quite happy with that petal. I could, if I wanted to, put a little bit of shadow down one side it. I try to keep shadow off of flower petals as much as possible. When I do use it, it's very minimal, and I use very cool mixes of paint. You never ever want any browns or any earth colours near your petals because you'll just make them look dead. And just to add to this before it dries, I just want to go a little bit warmer down there, and perhaps we'll even go just into the tiniest touch of cadmium yellow deep, which is also a Talens Rembrandt colour. And there we are. Now next I'm going to show you something very important, how to paint a white petal. So we're going to do another rose petal, but in reality it could be any white petal that we're doing, just so that I can show you how to keep your white petals looking clean and how to put shadow on effectively. All you really need to do is to add shadow, and all parts of the white petal should be shown up in some respect or other. So the edge may be shown by shadow, it may be shown by the edge of the shadow on another petal, or it may be shown by the background. Now I've started mixing some colour here, and look how brown it is. So I've got cerulean blue in here, I've got some lemon yellow and a touch of opera rose. So I'm mixing my own grey, but it's very brown at the moment, and that means there's too much pink and yellow in it and not enough blue. There's particularly too much yellow in it. So the sort of shadow colours you can mix for flowers, you can mix greenish greys, you can mix lilac based greys or blue based greys. What you don't want is to mix anything brown. So I'm going to add more blue and more pink to this colour until I get something that is better. So that's not bad, but let's get some more pink in it. And when you're mixing your own grey, you want to start with cool versions of the primaries. So you're looking at lemon yellow, and you could go up to a cadmium yellow, and you're looking at a cool blue like cerulean or phthalo blue, and you're looking at a cool pink. Don't use a scarlet red because all that will happen is you'll get brown or something very muddy. So here we are. As you see, I add more of the pink and the blue, and now I'm starting to get cleaner looking greys. So that one's not bad. I think I'm going to go a little bit more blue with it. So that's not a bad colour at all. Now because I've mixed from cerulean, in a couple of minutes what will happen is that colour will start to separate. So all that means is that each time I dip into it, I'm going to have to stir. What I'm going to do now is to wet my petal with clean water. So let's put the clean water on my petal, and then I'm going to add the shadow colour to it. So I've got some paper towel on hand so that I can control water levels, because I don't want anything to be drippy or running unless that's what I have planned for it. I'm just looking for real soft shadow to be added to this petal, and you always want to add shadow towards the base of things. Might be over to one side. Anything that goes in or behind something else is where you should add the shadow. And on a petal like this, you've also got this sort of there's some ripples in the petal. You can see where I've drawn the ripples go in. It might be a good idea to add some shadow there as well. So I'm going straight in now. While it's damp but not drippy, I'm going in with my shadow. Let's put a bit down the base. If it starts to bleed too much, you need to take some of the water out of your brush and spread from there. You do not want to spend ages adding shadow because you'll just end up with hard drying lines. So I'm going to be really quick, and let's have some in one or two places here where we might have some dips in the petal. Let's clean up that edge there. And you absolutely mustn't continue to work on it once it's started to dry. So that's as much as I'm going to do. And we would imagine that if this petal was part of a flower, excuse the aeroplane going over, we would have the other parts of the petal shown up by petals behind and by perhaps background colour or by a leaf. It's a real mistake to lose all of the white in a petal, so you want to be really, really delicate, not only in how you mix your shadow colour and avoiding those heavy, granular, earthy colours like yellow ochre and all those browns, but you also want to make sure that you apply it very sparingly, and you can always add more later, but you won't be able to get that pure white back again. Next we've got another one of my favourite flowers, and those are irises. So again, we've got a petal that has two different colours on it, but this one has some lines on it too, so I'm going to show you how to do that. Next I've got an iris petal, and I'm going to do something similar to how we did with the rose with two colours. So I want some yellow in the centre, and then I want purple around the outside, and I'm going to get some lines in it as well, which I'm going to do with this watercolour pencil that I've got in a crimson colour, which I've just sharpened, so it's got a nice sharp point on it. You have to be careful with these two colour petals, because where one overlaps with another colour, obviously you understand that those colours are going to mix together and you're going to get a mixed colour. So if I overlap yellow and I overlap purple, I'm going to end up with brown. Now there is a certain amount of overlapping that goes on naturally in petals, and you do get these beautiful sort of nuanced shades, but you never want to go so far with it that you end up with a brown petal. And I have actually seen brown irises, they're beautiful, but that's not what we're looking for in this case. We're painting a purple one with the yellow in the middle. So I'm going to be careful that they overlap a tiny amount but not too much, and I'm going to start out again by pre-wetting the petal. Now I'm going to paint this petal in more or less one pass, but I don't always do that, and you don't have to do that either. If you find it really hard to work quickly enough before everything starts to dry and you start getting drying lines, you can quite easily wet the petal, put the yellow on, let it dry, wet the petal again, and then put the purple on second. I would say do the yellow first, because light colours will bleed less than dark colours. So if you've got a flower where you have, for instance with our rose, we have yellow on each petal and pink on each petal, nothing wrong with you going across all those petals and putting the yellow in first and then going on top later on with the pink colour. Just make sure that you do let it dry in between coats, and that you re-wet the whole petal again afterwards. So I'm going to work fairly quickly and do it in one, but don't think that you have to work as fast as I am, because you can always work on top with another layer. But remember that those purples and reds do have a tendency to bleed, so you want to put the other colours on first. So I'm wetting that petal there. Now the yellow in the centre of the iris petal is very strong, so I'm actually going to go in with almost neat paint, so I get a real strength of colour. Not only that, but it won't move. If I go in with sticky paint, it's going to stay where I put it. Now I'm going to clean my brush, and I'm going to go in with some purple, and I've got some Talon's Rembrandt Blue Violet, and I've watered that down a lot more. But I'm going to keep it under control and not let it bleed right the way in to where the yellow is. Just want that sort of slight gap around the edge. It doesn't matter if you end up with a little bit of white in your flower where there wasn't any. It's far better to have a clean flower than it is to get everything mucky and brown and going together. Now I want to go darker now, so what I've done is gone in with really sticky paint straight out of my palette. I'm going to go in around the edges there. I'm actually going to take a little bit of a different colour at the top here, and this is, I believe it's Winsor and Newton Perylene Violet. This is a more red violet, so I'm going to get this in around the top here because it kind of matches the picture I'm looking at. I've got some, you can't see them, I've got some flower petals up on my computer, and it also matches this this beautiful pencil I've got here. So I'm going straight into wet paint now, drawing my lines in. Always want to draw your lines in the direction that they go outwards so that they taper as you lift your pencil off. So I'm working into wet paint here and just taking some of these little veins. Again, I'm not going to work on any of this for too long. Like I said, you can do this in stages. Don't think you have to work as fast as this. So that's good. I'm just going to clean up a little bit around the edge here where I've got a bit of smudging and I haven't got sort of a neat edge here. This flower's starting to dry now, so I'm going to leave it alone. Now Level with Iris is possibly my most favourite flower of all, and it really kills me that you can't cut these, you can't put them in a vase, they just don't last, they wilt straight away, and that is Poppy. So we're going to paint a poppy petal next. I'm going to show you how to get that sort of dried papery crinkly effect that you get on poppy petals. Next up, I've got a poppy petal, and what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to flood the colour on, and then I'm going to blot with some kitchen paper because we want that crinkled effect. I'm also going to add some of that that very dark colour that you get in the middle of poppies. I'm not going to use black, I'm going to use Payne's Grey in this occasion. You could use black, I just think Payne's Grey is a little bit softer and more pleasant to look at. So I've got this colour here, is my Talons Rembrandt Cadmium Yellow Light, and it's going to give me that real orange red. So I'm going to make sure that I've got quite a lot of paint and then just flood the colour straight on. So I'm working on dry paper this time because it's a strongly pigmented flower, and so what I don't want is for the water to go on first and dilute it. So spreading this on, keeping it quite wet because that gives me a little bit longer to work on it, but I don't want to end up with great big puddles, because if I have puddles I'll get uneven levels of water and then I'll get uneven drying. So flooding this colour all over the petal. So I've got a nice bright petal. I'm just going to rinse and dry my brush so that I can just lift out a little bit of the colour where it's puddling. I'm now going to go straight into very dry Payne's Grey and pick up lots of pigment on there, also drying my brush so that I don't end up with a puddle of paint that'll bleed everywhere. And now I'm going to pop a little bit in the middle here. There we are, and just make sure I've got a nice crisp edge on that bit there. The last thing I'm going to do with this petal is to blot out some little crinkle bits near the outside edge. So I'm going to take the towel and blot like this. Where possible, you're looking at sort of long shapes, and if you can splay them sort of outwards so you get a bit of a narrowing as they go towards the centre, almost like a fan effect, that can be quite useful too. And there's my crinkly poppy petal. Next we have something I've painted a lot of, and that's because they're in my garden, and that's hydrangeas. So these are an unusual type of flower, aren't they, because they look almost as beautiful after they're dead as when they're fresh and new. So I'm going to show you how to paint a hydrangea petal. Next up we have a hydrangea. I think they're most beautiful when they're just starting to sort of turn in the autumn. So I've got a little bit of Quinacridone pink. So this is Talons Rembrandt, and I'm actually, as I apply it, I'm going to apply it quite watery because they're quite pale petals. As I apply it, I'm actually also going to go in just with a little bit of lemon and a little bit of cerulean so that we can get that kind of lovely soft greenish grey that these turn to. So I could mix these colours separately, but I'm just going to take them straight on. So I've got some yellow, and then I'm going to go in with a little bit of cerulean. It's quite a weak colour, so there's no worry that anything crazy will happen. I need to keep those water levels even. I have to be careful that this side doesn't puddle more than the other side, otherwise I'll get sort of a bit of a drying line. So I'm going to take that across there, and then we'll go in again with a bit more of the pink. Always looking, like I said, to keep these water levels even across the whole petal. Now you've got several things that go on with hydrangeas. You've got little lines that are inscribed in them almost, little veins. So I'm going to do that. I've got a very short watercolour pencil here in pink, so I'm going to take those in again like we did with the iris while it's wet. Get those shapes. Now another thing that you get, and you don't get this on all hydrangeas, but you do get it on the ones I have in my garden, is that you get some little speckles appear, particularly in the autumn. And so I'm going to go back to the other watercolour pencil, which was this Crimson Lake. It's a darker colour, and I'm just going to shave some little bits onto the surface there so we get those tiny speckles. I have got, if you're interested in painting hydrangeas, I have got a mini course where you can complete a whole hydrangea painting with me. There's a link in the description to my online courses if those interest you, so you can pop across there. Lent in the paint a little bit here, so I'll get a little bit of cotton wool in a minute, a little bit of water, and clean that up. So there's my hydrangea petal. Some of the most exciting flowers to paint are lilies. So we have all sorts of things going on here. We have these splashes, these sort of bleeding effects of bright colours on white petals, and we also have speckles and spots and pollen. So I'm going to show you how to get those beautiful dramatic lily effects now. At this point in the video, if you're enjoying this video and getting some value from it, could I just ask you to do me a favour and click the like button? YouTube rewards audience interaction, so that means my channel will do better if you like the video or share it or subscribe or comment on it. I'll be really grateful, and it helps my little art channel to grow so I can teach more people. So I'm going on to a lily petal now, and I've picked up a different palette. This one has some paints in by Jackman's Art Materials. These are a British company, a little British company making handmade paints. So I'm going to use this one here, which I'm rather fond of. It's Quinacridone Magenta. Now what I want in this case is I want a bleeding effect. So I'm not going to keep the water levels even. I'm going to pre-wet the petal, and then I'm going to go on with the Quinacridone Magenta a little bit wetter so that it bleeds out slightly. You also have speckles on lilies and sometimes pollen dust. I'm going to use the watercolor pencil again to get the dots on the petal. There are other ways you could do it though. I sometimes use Brusho pigment powders. I don't want to use that today because there's so many it's such a small board and so many things around it. I'll probably get the Brusho everywhere. But that's another option only for the brave if you want to use Brusho pigment powders for pollen dust. So we're getting our clean water on, and what you're looking for is for it to spread across the whole flower, and you're looking for it to be nice and wet but without puddles. Whenever you have puddles of paint, it will want to spread and bleed and dry in strange ways. So in order to stop that happening, you need to keep the water levels even. Now I'm going to go in, once this has dried slightly and it's evenly wet, I'm going to go in with wetter paint on this occasion because I actually want to cause the paint to bleed. So I'm going to get the Quinacridone Magenta and make sure that my brush is quite wet and just slightly wetter than the surface it's going onto. Because it's wet, it wants to spread out. So I have to be careful to control it. Do excuse the pigeons if you can hear them. They sit on the studio roof. Quite like them, but they are in all my YouTube videos lately. It's getting towards evening here, so they tend to make more noise in the evening. I'm not sure why, sort of last hurrah before they go to sleep. I'm going to go back in now with thicker paint because I want it to be really dark in the middle there, and it's a fabulous colour. What I might do as well with this, because you sometimes get these lines down the middle, is I'm going to get a small brush that I've cleaned and dried, take out a line down the centre there. So just getting that idea of a line down the middle, and now I'm going to go back to my crimson watercolour pencil and get those dots on. Sometimes with dots like this it can be better actually with a blunter pencil than this one because you get bigger dots, so only sharpen it if you want little dots. And there we are. I'm going to work into that water. Now going onto a wet surface like this means that the watercolour pencil will release a whole lot more pigment, and it's one of my favourite ways of using them. So really happy with that petal. Do pop into the video description, so it's just below the video, and you can get a discount code if you would like one. You can use my discount code and get 10% off of Jackman's Art Materials. They do paints and brushes and they send worldwide. So let's look now at tulips, one of my favourite spring flowers, and we're going to learn how to get that sort of big, extravagant, curved petal look. So I'm going to get kind of an orangey yellow tulip this time, and then we're going to have some pink in it as well. So I've just been painting tulips like this. So I'm just going to start with a bit of clean water, and I think actually what we'll do is we'll go in with this colour here, which is Windsor Orange Red shade. So this is an orange, but it's it tends towards a coral, shall we say. It's a good colour for sunsets actually, and I think just for fun down the bottom here we'll go back into some cadmium yellow light so we get that orangey effect. Now you see this puddle of paint here, I want to get rid of that, so I'm just going to dry my brush and it'll just sort of suck the paint off the board. Now I'm going to go in with a darker colour here. I think I'll go in again with the SAA Permanent Rose because I know it's an incredibly strong colour. So I'm going to go up and spread. Now the thing with tulips is the colours that are on them tend to go out like so. Now you see here you've got that round bit at the end there. Just going to lift that out. That's happening because the paint is wet, so we're going with more dry paint, and we can take these out. So it's always a matter of looking at the shape of the petals and really studying, you know, right from the point of drawing, right from the beginning. It's so important to get that shape right. I see so many people drawing things that haven't really got very distinctive petal shapes, sort of clematis, things like that, and just vaguely drawing an oval, but they've all got their own distinct shapes and colours, and it's really helpful if you can get that shape right from the start. Now I'm going to lift out that puddle of paint there because I just don't want it causing me any problems. And there's our tulip petal. So it's late spring here where I'm filming, and I'm going to fast forward us to Christmas. We're going to look at poinsettia. Technically these aren't flowers but brightly coloured leaves, which makes them quite different to the normal sort of petals you might come across. So here's my poinsettia, and I'm going to go into a bit of a deeper red this time. So this one is Talon's Rembrandt Cadmium Red Deep. It's that real lovely fresh sort of, not quite a blood colour, but very similar. And I want almost a flat wash across this this poinsettia petal, which is really, I think technically they're actually leaves. So I want the colour to apply evenly. Whenever you want a flat wash, you want to make sure you've mixed enough paint ready to get across the whole thing. I'm also going to put some slightly darker highlights on it, or lowlights I should say, with this colour here, which is, I always get the name of this wrong, it's Winsor & Newton. It's something like Permanent Madder Brown Lake, or Madder Brown Permanent Lake. It's got madder and brown and lake in anyway. It's a great colour. It's not at all brownish, otherwise I wouldn't be using it on this petal. So I'm going to take this in. You'll see that I've also drawn some veins on this leaf, and I'm going to put those in again with the watercolour pencil. Again, even with things like leaf veins, I mean, I see people just not taking the time to really study the flower before they start. And with these veins that come out from the centre stem of the centre vein of a leaf, sometimes the veins line up with each other, and sometimes they're offset from the veins on the other side of the centre stem. So really important to look at these things before you start, because otherwise you end up just guessing and you don't end up capturing the essence of the flower. And that's almost more important with a simple painting style than it is with a complex painting style. If you're painting very loosely, you really have to have a good idea of the characteristics of the flower. So there's my poinsettia. Now I could, just to give it a bit more body, I could actually, you know, lift out a little bit of paint in places where it might be slightly raised up. So I've got a damp brush there, and just before it dries I'm going to go on with this darker madder colour just around a few little edge areas. You do get these bits on poinsettias that are just slightly darker. Being really careful not to go in with very drippy paint, and perhaps might have a bit of dark along the centre here just to give it a little bit of dimension. Can't work on it for too long, because once it starts to dry I'll end up getting all sorts of problems. You can actually work on with the watercolour pencil once it starts drying. It doesn't do it too much damage, but you don't want to be going in with paint once it's drying. And then I'm going to take these very, very fine lines here. Again, I'm just using this crimson pencil. And I've already checked, and those little veins come out almost opposite each other. There's my poinsettia petal. You can see that we're keeping all of these very bright, and although I might go back into some of them with shadow, I would keep it very, very minimal. Some of the most complex petal patterns and colours are to be found in pansies and violas, and next we're going to look at a pansy petal. So now I've got my pansy. Again, just like the other petals that have multiple colours in, I want to pre-wet first, and I'm going to put the yellow in the centre. Again, I'm going for this cadmium yellow light. It's a really, really useful colour, very, very sunny. I'm going to go in with purple again, just like I did for the iris. I'm going to use the Talon's Rembrandt Permanent Blue Violet, which is a lovely strong sort of imperial purple. If you need a purple in your palette, just a standard purple, it's pretty good. I'm just going to water it down a little bit and then take that around the outside edge. You get these sort of crinkles around the edges of pansies. I actually think that should be a little bit bluer, so I think we'll just go in with a touch of ultramarine. So we get that more typical pansy colour. So that's looking quite nice. What I want to do now is get this impression of some little bits coming out of the centre here in the darker purple, going in very quickly with thick paint so that it won't bleed too far into the yellow and we won't get that brown appearing. And then the last thing I'm going to do with this one is just take some of that purple out, and I've got a purple watercolour pencil this time, and we're getting these lines coming out. And there we've got a really beautiful effect with a lot of contrast. For our only fully yellow petal, I'm going to paint you a daffodil petal. I do see people getting into a lot of trouble with daffodils and really losing the freshness and making them very muddy, so we're going to look at how to get those nice shadowed sort of ripple shapes on your daffodil petal. It's a very simple flower. I'm just going to go on straight onto dry paper with a quite watery mix again of the cadmium yellow light. And daffodils you often need more than one yellow for them, so sometimes the outer petals are this sort of sunny yellow, and then for the inner petals you might need much more of a cool lemon yellow. But I'm just going to do this petal here, and what I really want to show you is how effectively you can use green as a shadow on some yellow flowers, particularly daffodils. They have a lot of green in them. So I'm going to go straight in this time with Jackman's Art Materials Spring Green here. I usually mix my own greens, but just for the ease of the video, we'll go in with a ready-made green. And I'm just going to put some tiny, tiny touches of that. I'm going to lift a little bit of the water out here. I'm also going to pick up some of the shadow colour that I made earlier and just get a little bit of a rippled effect in places. So incredibly important though not to go too brown or too muddy with these daffodil petals. I see so many people killing daffodils. If you're in any kind of doubt with yellow flowers, it's always better to default to a slightly greenish shadow, or even go straight on with a little bit of blue, which will, you know, a pale blue like cerulean will turn to green as it hits, and keep the shadow colour absolutely minimum. So which of these is your favourite flower to paint, and has this video helped you to have a little bit more of an understanding of how to render flowers effectively? Do let me know in the comments. If you'd like to explore some of these techniques of flower painting in a little bit more detail, I have another video that goes through just the techniques I use for flower painting. You can watch that one right now.